RT is sitting down with award-winning scholar and internationally recognized politician, executive committee member of the Palestine Liberation Organization, Dr. Hanan Ashrawi. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Anastasia. It's my pleasure.
Dr. Ashrawi, let's start with one of the most highlighted issues at this year's United Nations General Assembly gathering. Of course, Palestine's bid for recognized statehood. We know that Palestine is already recognized by over 120 countries. Why does this UN vote matter?
It's very important because this is a turning point in sort of Palestinian history and in the history of peacemaking in the region. We do have, as you said, bilateral recognitions from different countries. We have by now 127. But at the same time, we have been engaged in a peace process that has taken over 2 decades of prolongation and stalling, with Israel creating facts on the ground, building settlements, unilaterally acting from a position of power as an occupier, and undermining the chances of peace and the objectives of the 2-state solution and so on. So we are trying now to say that this is a new phase, a new era, let's say. We are going to the international community to say that the Palestinian question and the Palestinian people have the right to self-determination and should be placed within this international context as the essence of multilateralism, as the source of international or global legislation, and the Palestinian question must be resolved in accordance with international law.
Now, the United States has made it more than clear that a veto is really its only possible reaction to a resolution at the Security Council. So, are there plans reported that Palestine may consider going through the General Assembly? Is that really in the works?
Well, we have many different options and alternatives, and we studied all of them, and we're keeping all our options open, frankly speaking, because if we go through the Security Council path directly, that means we want different objectives, and we certainly don't want to have a confrontation with the U.S., but they're the ones who are choosing a confrontation over something that is actually part of their own policies and their own declared principles. We could also go to the General Assembly and ask for upgrading of our status and ask for greater recognition and then ask for support for our bid to go to the Security Council. So what we're saying is we can go straight to the Security Council and deal with the consequences, and if the U.S. wants to isolate itself with Israel on the wrong side of the law, it could be its choice. Or we could go indirectly to the Security Council, also fortified by a positive resolution in the General Assembly, and then again represent our bid. But as I said, there are many, many options, and we're keeping them all open.
Unlike going through the Security Council, going through the General Assembly would mean a non-member status for Palestine. Why would that be important?
That's very important because although we have observer status as the PLO, we want to have a non-member state status, which means there would be a recognition of statehood, but it's our membership that is an observer membership. But that opens the doors for us to become a member of all UN organizations, institutions, agencies, and so on. It would empower the Palestinians. It would also declare our territory as occupied territory, not disputed territory, and therefore up for grabs. It would declare East Jerusalem as occupied, not as the eternally unified capital of Israel forever and ever. And it would lay the foundations of any resolution based on international law. So it's very important, and we can also hold Israel accountable, which is something that is driving Israel and the U.S. Absolutely insane when talking about accountability, because they don't want any kind of accountability for Israel, whether through UN human rights organizations like the UN Council on Human Rights, or whether the International Criminal Court or International Court of Justice. They just want to ensure that Israel continues to act outside and above the law.
You have mentioned access to UN institutions. If we look, for example, at the International Criminal Court, access to that, what kind of really impact would that have for Palestine?
That would have a tremendous impact, because that means that the International Criminal Court can act in accordance with the Rome Convention. And the Rome Statute describes settlement activities as a war crime, because when you violate the 4th Geneva Convention, when you move populations of your own into occupied territory and you take other people's lands, this is a war crime, a collective crime against the Palestinian people. So automatically we can start a suit and law cases against not just the government, but against even all settlers. Any settler will be seen as being part of this war crime, and that's why they're quite worried about the Palestinians becoming a state or getting access to the instruments of accountability, particularly the International Criminal Court.
Well, in an interview with RT we had aired previously, a Palestinian politician, Nabil Shath, said to us that Israelis must be chained to be taken to paradise, assuming he meant on their way to peace. Who is strong enough, do you think, to forge a chain like that?
Look, I think it's a moral power more than anything else. And it seems to me that if you can use your powers of persuasion and humanity for the Israelis to understand that their land grab, their greed for the land, for control, for subjugating another people, is really a strategic liability for Israel. It's a rational, political, legal, human decision. You have to think about the consequences of your actions, that you cannot forever claim to be above the law and claim to be exempt from any accountability and claim real impunity and preferential treatment. That there is a time in which all these things will end and you'll be held accountable like any other country, and you cannot continue enslaving a people forever and getting away with it. So it's a question of persuasion and looking clearly at reality and understanding that given also the context of the Arab Spring, given the context of regional and even global changes and transformations, Israel has a unique chance to make peace quickly with the Palestinians and to be accepted in the region, rather than continue with its unilateral, dangerous, adventurous policies of control and oppression and theft of land and so on, and then delay the inevitable, which is going to be further confrontations, violence and extremism.
Now, if we look a little bit at United States involvement in all of this, we know that last year Barack Obama spoke at the General Assembly saying that hopefully by this year, 2011, Palestine will be recognized as a member within the United Nations. Now his administration is clearly opposed to this. Do you see this as a stab in the back?
I see this as a source of tremendous letdown, real disappointment, because he raised expectations in a variety of ways, starting with ending all settlement activities, to acting decisively in peacemaking, to basing all peacemaking on international law and multilateralism, and to building the Palestinian state on the 67 boundaries. So having reneged on almost all these things, he has created a sense of letdown among the Palestinians, the Arabs, even the world, people of good conscience who expected Obama to live up to his promises and to his values and principles rather than to narrow self-interest. And right now, if he's seen as doing Israel's bidding and trying to justify the occupation and trying to justify Israeli policies and actually putting pressure on everybody, starting with the Palestinians, who are, of course, the weakest party, because we do not have any kind of power or weapons or anything. So he'll be seen as sort of not just bullying the Palestinians, but he'll be seen as weighing in on the side of an illegal and unjust situation, and he'll be undermining the standing and credibility and interests of the U.S. in the region and throughout the world.
What about other brokers, Russia, the European Union, the United Nations? Do they have really a place in these talks?
The quartet has a place. What they're trying to do is very dangerous, because the U.S. in many ways has changed its policy to accommodate this most extreme government in Israel. Not only that, but it was trying to put pressure on the quartet to accept this position. On the UN to self-negate by saying Palestinians shouldn't go to the UN. On the EU by asking them to change their long-standing policy on the two-state solution and so on, and Jerusalem and the illegality of settlements. And of course on Russia, that has taken a very clear stance on the basis of international law and Palestinian rights, including the right to self-determination. So by adopting the Israeli position and then trying to shove it down the throat of the quartet, the US is really distorting a legal system as well as a political system as well as the human imperative of achieving a just peace.
Why do you think Americans and some European countries have been willing to welcome the Arab Spring, and yet Palestine's self-determination is seen as something pretty much unacceptable by the United States in particular?
It is ironic, this double standard, that they look at the Arab Spring as a way of vindication of the drive towards democracy and freedom and human rights and human dignity, and yet when it comes to the Palestinians, we are decontextualized, we are removed. This is very selective, precisely because, I think, our occupier is Israel, and Israel is a domestic issue in the US and has enormous influence on the careers of and the fates of many politicians through elections, through access to the media, through the campaign funds and so on. And of course there's this strategic alliance that we talked about. So Israel is not treated like any other country. Israel has constantly been exempt, also because of the horror of the Holocaust and all that history and the Western guilt over what they did to the Jews. So in a sense, this has shaped a certain bubble in which Israel was given and demanded what I described earlier as a sense of exceptionalism and entitlement and immunity, and of course it has acted with impunity. So the Palestinians were deprived of the protection of the law, and Israel was given this exceptional treatment, particularly because it has a powerful lobby also in the US. There is a growing movement of solidarity with the Palestinians, and I hope that that would hold their own countries accountable, or systems of government. And this is part, as you said, of the Arab Spring, where the Arab Spring has moved in relation to the social media and these global principles. They do not apply just to the Arab world or to Palestine or to the West. They apply to humanity as a whole. And therefore the exemption of the Palestinians from these values and the exemption of Israel from accountability for violating these values will no longer be tolerated. And it may, for a while, the Americans may succeed in having their own narrow self-interest trump their own values and principles, but not for long, because they too will be held accountable by their own people.
Dr. Hanan Ashrawi, thank you for your time with us today.
Thank you very much, Anastasia. It's nice to meet you.